Hello and welcome to our next episode of Minerva PLM TV. I'm Jennifer Moore, your host, and today I have with me Mark Reisig of Eris. Mark, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Jen. It's great to be here.
Wonderful. And Mark, I know that you started out as a CAD guy and you moved into Product Lifecycle Management, working with companies like Oracle and Autotrol, and right before Eris, actually GE. And like many of us in PLM, you followed a curiosity and opportunity and sort of fell into product lifecycle management a bit accidentally. Can you share with us a few highlights on your path?
Absolutely. Well, it first started because I was in college as an accounting major, and I was afraid that I might succeed. So, and even back then, I had been offered to work on a program for developing a desktop computing device with no computer science background at all. I was just simply good at games, and these guys wanted me on it, and I thought that was the craziest idea I ever heard of. I wasn't going to spend the summer, this was out in Indiana, working on a desktop computing device that would run games. I would go off and do something more important. Ultimately, I decided to leave college, drop out, try to play soccer. And when I came back, my neighbor got me a job in CAD. He's like, I played him in games and chess. And he played country champions, and he said, hey, you're great at figuring things out. You need to be an engineer, get involved in CAD. So in my early days of CAD, literally weeks, I'm learning CAD, and I see people doing 2D drafting, and they're doing 2D, and having the small accounting background I had, I'm like, hey, there's a Z-axis here. We could do this in 3D. And they're like, hey, kid, just shut up and do the drafting. And I didn't. I immediately started automating everything. I said, I'm not going to go through this. This is just as boring as accounting. I'm going to automate everything. And in no time, I was programming in multiple languages and did NC programming for 3D models way before it was very popular. And I would just, and 13 months later, at the age of 20, I was a supervisor with all these 40-year-old guys, which I knew was a little nuts. So, I decided I needed to back off, went to my second job, learned more about different disciplines and engineering. Ultimately, I ended up at General Foods at the time. And I was beginning, this is up in Westchester, New York, IBM land. And there I'm developing databases and using workstations and or the databases behind graphics. So I'm doing intelligent process and instrumentation diagrams and intelligent equipment arrangements of plants. And I've got all these IBM people trying to sell me on their technology, and I'm not interested. I'm just a young kid that all the people at General Foods were listening to, so I had a great time there. And those are my really early days of trying to control configuration management. And ultimately, I spent 2 years managing a design group at their biggest plant. My engineering manager suggested, kid, you are in the wrong place. You need to be working in software, right? So I was developing all this very cool stuff and kind of like early digital twin stuff. So, we could see the whole plant and had all the data about all the equipment and maintenance management and stuff like that. I took her advice. So I ended up with a company called Autotrol, 12 years, 7 promotions, totally great time, fun groups to be in, did a lot of work in Department of Defense. And in the very early days of the internet, I was, which I got involved in the late 80s, I started proposing, hey, we could put parts, bills and materials, change management. We could put all these things together and create something, a PDM term, I had not heard of it. We could all do this on top of a browser and, would demonstrate it to people. So that was I became passionate about this idea, but I'd run into the VP of sales who would say, okay, so we build all this stuff. Where do we get the money for the hardware? Who's going to pay us? And I'm like, forget the hardware. This is going to be the web, right?
So cloud before cloud was the thing.
Yeah, exactly. And so I had really intelligent people looking at me like I was crazy. They were just a handful of, sharp programmers that understood this. Ultimately, they did change their mind, and they developed PLM, and the CEO came back to me, and he did sit through like 3 demonstrations of this. So there was something there interesting in him. So we got into PLM, and we competed with early Matrix 1, early Windchill, Metaphase, and that ultimately led to me working for a startup company where I had teams of people that did PLM Federation, and I used Matrix 1, Windchill, Team Center Enterprise, Team Center Engineering, and other PLM products. But in reality, I wasn't doing that much federation. I was really fixing big PLM deployments.
And really focusing in on like the business processes behind that, like fixing the way that companies were working.
Yeah, I was fixing the way that they were working, and they had made some poor assumptions, and in some cases, the largest PLM system in the world, they were trying to get rid of many, put everybody into one. And I realized they were going to compete with this, the Apple iPhone, which hadn't been made yet. But these ex-Apple people knew that applications would be coming up, right, in this little iPhone. So I explained to them, by focusing on everybody using one system and not making these guys as innovative as possible, you're making a serious mistake, because this is a game changer. Now, we all know it's a game changer now, but back then in that company, they were like, we're the leaders, we're the, we care more about the other well-known cell phone company. And they actually paid me to look into it, and I came back with the same thing. I said, you got to watch out. This iPhone's really going to take off and kill you. So some of it was, how they used PLM, and that was a company, like many companies, that just kept accumulating PLM systems. As I shut them down, they added more. One of the last ones they added, so I'm consolidating them. One of the last ones they actually added was Eris. And I had to say, Eris, like, you have like one of everything, what's Eris? So, that was way back. That's like, and they're still a customer. And that was in 2007. So I went on to, through an engagement with Rolls-Royce, trying to communicate with GE. I went on to GE. And GE, the last half of my career was totally focused on helping them with their PLM problems. And through that, I saw the downfall of GE coming, and that's what led me to Eris.
That's definitely a varied background. I mean, from accounting to gaming to CAD to software to PLM business processes and all kinds of other things in between. And really with this idea of fixing different business processes, I've heard others call you a bit of a PLM doctor. What would you say are some good PLM practices that really span industries and span company size, especially since you've worked with both startups and GE, right? So what would you say that are some things that everybody could take advantage of in a PLM practice way?
Yeah, and I don't know if I'm a PLM doctor or a PLM psychologist. When you walk into these situations, it's definitely a little bit of both. Yeah, so generally when you walk in to any company and you start asking them, what are your pain points, and they start taking you through, what works, what doesn't work, you generally see a lot of the same things. Like a lot of companies have taken out of the box solutions that would work a certain way, but they then customized them to achieve something with no plan to be able to upgrade it to the next thing. So essentially they get stuck. And in the larger companies, and like the GE experience, they had to deal with matrix 1, so they were tossing out matrix 1s to anybody that wanted one, right? Not thinking of the consequences, right? So, I call that like PLM hoarding, or they become collectors. So it's like this museum of, due to reorganizations, mergers, acquisitions, you just see they have bits and pieces of PLM all over the place, and they need a strategy for how to get back into doing what PLM was actually intended to do, which is help them transform, help them have a digital thread, right? Not try to have 75 or 100 different PLM systems. So, some just really basic good practices are, the first thing is to acknowledge that PLM is not an engineering tool. It's really used to transform the product aspect of your business. And with that, what you're creating is a product lifecycle management ecosystem for that product, essentially a digital thread. And the simple way I always tell people to look at it is, think of the life cycle from beginning to end of life. Think of the disciplines that you use, not just hardware, but eventually, back then I was telling them software, and now you actually see software, electronics, electrical. That's another vertices. And then there's a supply chain as well. Mm-hmm. And really, it's not a straight line, the product life cycle. It's a circular line. And it's a series of smaller circles that make up what PLM is. So you have to understand what it's supposed to be. And it's not just a check-in, check-out engineering CAD tool. So you have to know that going in. And you definitely have to have a vision. And this is with any transformation, but you need a focused vision on what it is you want to accomplish, knowing that that's always going to be changing, right? And so that's important. And so while it's very focused, you also want to look at it kind of holistically, mm-hmm. Because it will absolutely change. It's kind of like seeing the peak of a mountain and then figuring out how to get there. There are many ways to get there, but you're always going to have that end goal in mind. I'm a big fan of staying current. I was when I was an end user on the, in the non-software space. So, even outside of PLM, I upgraded everything every year. I always wanted to be current because I want to be ready to be able to attack the next opportunity or defend against any particular threat. So I'm a big fan of that. Now, typically when I walked into places, they weren't even close to being upgrading every year. The other thing is the idea that you're really going to throw your money at your biggest problem, your bottlenecks. There's a book written way back in the 80s called The Goal and the Theory of Constraints. And it basically, if I've got 3 workstations and all these people can handle as much work as possible, and right in front of that, I've got another one, and steel or whatever they need to work on has, mounted up to the ceilings, that's my problem, right? And not cool technology or something your boss thinks is cool or whatever. You need to understand what your problem is and to focus on that, because, in the end, you're going to have a having a connected digital thread should be one of your goals, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if it's disconnected, as most are, you need to solve that. The other big challenge, which is actually pretty simple, is people talk about people, processes, and technology. The technology should be there to support the people and the most optimized processes, not the other way around, right? So you don't adopt the processes to meet the technology. The technology should support that and the data, which used to be a problem. Now it's growing at almost double exponential rates. So don't forget the data. And then just a couple other basics. You should be focused on kind of data governance as it goes across the life cycle. Mm-hmm. With champions, configuration. This should be obvious, but configuration management. If you're not following some CN2 change management processes, you'd be surprised. I go in there and a lot of the problems that companies have are they're creating changes and these bottlenecks are way downstream when they could be handled easily up front. And the other thing I'd say is really you want to drive towards that vision incrementally. Mm-hmm. People use the term minimum viable products, but the idea is you understand the problem, you build the right solution, you iterate, and this is just as in agile, this allows quicker wins, return on investments, and momentum. And for people, I think every person has an ROI as well. So in other words, I'm totally willing to change if I understand the value.
Right.
Most people, when big programs are rolled out, they don't have any idea why they should be involved, nor do some of their bosses. So, you've got to get that kind of buy-in across the group, all these silos or divisions or different functions where people are just doing their work business as usual. At first, they'll see this as unwanted change, but once they understand that this is going to make their life easier, and that's what needs to be conveyed to them. So mm-hmm. Once it starts to steamroll. So once you develop some of these champions. So those are things I always look for.
So I heard quite a few things there that are just general good business practices. Of course, understanding that product lifecycle management spans beyond engineering, absolutely recognizing that enterprise value, understanding where the top of the mountain is, keeping your vision in play, and then really starting to think about the deeper level of your different business processes, the theory of constraints. Are you handling configuration and change management appropriately? And then beyond that, are you communicating to your staff and your teams why this matters and why this is important and helping to get their feedback on what those constraints really are? Because sometimes, at this level, we may think, oh, my constraint is XYZ, but down here, they're like, no, it's, we actually had somebody pick a product up off the shop floor before it had labels on it, got sent out to the wrong customer at the wrong time. Like different things happen in different ways that may not always be captured really clearly. So when you're starting these change initiatives, what would you say are some critical success factors, especially with one thing that you mentioned that I actually didn't say, which was thinking about that digital thread and the digital twin, right? Because we all know we're moving into this digital future at different paces, depending on where we are in our journey already, handling that master data. How do you get started? What do you do?
So the one thing I would tell everybody is don't underestimate organizational change as you go into it. Because what you're going to find as you go from, say, engineering to manufacturing, just to pick on two departments, you're going to see that you can optimize some processes where people in engineering, some of that work could be, or in manufacturing could be done in engineering, and then other work can be done in manufacturing. There's lots of things you can do to horizontally dissolve these silos as you create this digital twin. And some of it's just with how you organize yourself. And then I tend to stay very focused on optimizing your to-be processes, right? People are very stuck in this is how I did it. This is how I did it. You know, they don't realize they did it because the tool made them do it a million years ago. So optimize your processes. The data should be pristine. So really, you want to make sure the source of truth of your data and who can change it, the source of record along the way. There's data integrity, so that the data can move across a connected digital thread. So there has to be some governance. If you're talking digital twin, you have digital twins out there. There's different scenarios, but you always want to make sure that you have, and this even predates digital twins. Like I worked on the space shuttle program in 1988, so this is a couple of years after the Challenger disaster. I worked with Lockheed Martin on when the space shuttle came back and maintaining it. And so that's a very important asset. And assets are very important. So you need the first thing you want to think of with your assets out in the field is that you have an up-to-date configuration of that digital twin. And if you're an OEM that can connect to it, that digital thread, you really want to think complete end-to-end. So again, the people leading it might have come from engineering, but they need to think of it all the way from when they get the order, how they do new product introductions, and how the engineering procurement or the whole procurement process, whether it's configure to order, engineering to order, or whatever it is. You need to understand that end to end so you can have a traceable digital thread, and everybody that needs to play is involved. And then the big trap is always what I call the shiny object syndrome, where there's all sorts of cool technologies out there. Like I was one of these people. I could put a sensor on something. I could get data off that. You know, you can put it in a data lake, and that's where it'll like die in the data swamp. You'll end up spending tons of money doing that because you had some cool technology, but you weren't thinking about all the processes that move the data all the way through. We created digital twins without requirements, which I knew was a problem, but not everybody agreed with me. And I knew we would do software before we would do software. So in the requirements, you needed to have software parameters. Mm-hmm. You needed to be able to touch on the digital twin and trace back and see them, and see when they needed to be updated and so on. So you just have to watch out for when you start focusing too much on technology and not enough on what you're actually trying to achieve.
That makes a lot of sense to me. But one of the things that I didn't hear you mention that I have been hearing quite a lot lately is executive sponsorship. Is there a difference in trying to focus a change initiative on savings versus actual transformation that would cause you to leave out executive sponsorship? Like, why would that stay off your list?
Well, so there's kind of two things here. The first is you can have, not to pick on my old CEO at GE, but everyone knows Jeff Immelt. He was going to create one of the top software companies in the world. And I love, let me just be absolutely clear. I love GE. I have many friends there. They treated me really well, sent me to Crotonville classes. It was a great company, but the executive champion alone doesn't guarantee success of incredible change. What you absolutely have to have is everybody needs to know what must change. There has to be something that's so obvious, right? That's what he's championing. So it becomes a mission, a purpose. It's kind of like Gandhi saying 100,000 Englishmen are not going to control 350 million Indians, or Martin Luther King's I have a dream. So it's just something incredibly transformative that champion has to get behind. And where they're most effective is actually with the people that report to them, because if you don't get all of them, you're going to have a problem, right? It's like all transformation efforts will run into legacy technologies and someone who's responsible for them, and both functionally and IT, and you're going to have to deal with that. And otherwise, you're not going to have the transformative change that you want, right? But I do believe, given the fact that you have a really critical thing that can be communicated and the whole company understands, that executive champions, of course, will help. Now, the other thing would be basically, as you've decided what this goes back to kind of having you need this vision as well. But really, there's things, the main thing is when you're trying to reach that vision, you have obstacles. You have things that are in your way, right? And I'd say one of the most important things is to focus on those things that are in the way. Those are the things that you need to take out, right? And sometimes it's the PLM system itself. Other times it's the ERP system. But if you find you're in a digital transformation and you're having to work around the PLM system, that's a problem.
That is a problem.
You're gonna have enough people changing, culturally and adapting these systems that people think, well, I spent a gazillion dollars on, I need to keep it. That's going to prevent you from actually really transforming. And that's a reason why to have a good executive champion, right? They can help just make that happen.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense to me, and I totally understand why it didn't make it to your original list, because there are so many other ways to lead people and make sure that you really are harnessing the power of the why, like Simon Sinek would say. Yep. And making sure that it's a mission that makes sense, and that you get your people on board, and that in and of itself will often help you more than just having an executive sponsorship. So with that, can you share with us one of your favorite stories about impacting change for good?
Yeah, I would say back when I was in my PLM doctor role, I was working, I guess this would be about 2003, 2004. We were in the Gulf War. I'm working with the Research Center for the Army, and they had an issue with Humvees that were they were going over IEDs, landmines, or being shot at, and the underbelly of the Humvee was not very strong. They had a lot of armor around the outside, but nothing underneath. My job was simply, so the problem was there's 10,000 Humvees out in the field, many configurations. So I get called in to try to bring all the different designs in and come up with a way to continuously do this. And along with CAD geometry, and from one PLM system to another. And we had done a demonstration of this. As we were doing it, we did a demonstration of this, and we had a 3-star general and a warfighter, a 19-year-old kid from Kentucky. And we're sitting in one of those virtual caves, the three of us, and the 19-year-old and the 3-star general are having a conversation about, a day in the life. And he's explaining how I don't need all these things. We basically just need rip them out. And we only need water and ammo. And the reason they had invited him up is this guy was modifying the Humvees by welding steel onto the bottom. And the general was trying to understand exactly what he was doing other than putting more steel there. And here he was creating kind of an upside down pyramid. So I took a napkin out and I drew the hull of a ship, like a sailboat, and showed it to him. And I said, General, I think he means this. It's a hull. And of course, the the 19-year-old guy from Kentucky's like, I don't even know what a hull is. And he's like, a sailboat hull. And I'm like, yeah, he wants a hull made out of, so the explosions will divert off to the left or the right. And he's like, yes, that's what I want.
That's what I want.
So I'm sure they would have figured this out on their own. But it was just a very cool experience, seeing the reaction on his face and knowing that, ultimately they were going to end up saving more lives. So, I like the changes that actually impact people.
I'd say that's a big one. I mean, tragic situation, definitely not something that anyone wants to be faced with, but seeing the ingenuity in the field of this creative individual to protect his fellow soldiers and then bringing that back to be able to impact everyone as a whole, that's definitely change for good. This has been really interesting, Mark. Thank you so much. Do you have any final thoughts that you would like to share with our viewers today about product lifecycle management or innovation from your years of experience?
Thanks, Jen. It's been great. I think this is an exciting time for PLM because a lot of companies are really having to transform, and now that you really do have the ability to have a connected digital thread, you're going to see a lot of movement in with companies either redeploying PLM or doing a lot more with it, also with the digital twins as well. So an exciting time.
Absolutely it is. And thank you so much. I'd actually really love to bring you back to talk more about digital thread and digital twin another time. I hope you'd be open to that.
I'd be glad to.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And to all of our viewers, of course, if you have a question that you'd like to see answered, drop your comments below or send me an email at jmo@minerva-plm.com to have your questions answered in a future episode. If you like this content, remember to hit the like and subscribe button so you'll be alerted to future content and never miss an episode. Thanks everyone so much and have a great day.